Welcome back. Singapore is turning to synthetic biology to make everyday products like fragrances, vitamins, and fats more sustainably. This is a move away from conventional petrochemical processes. A new lab by A-Star and the National University of Singapore will be using engineered microbes and enzymes to help companies produce ingredients, chemicals, and materials. It aims to use AI to cut the time needed to move innovations from research to commercial production, and will first focus on nutrition and consumer care products. And here to share more on this is Dr. Tze Tan, who is Executive Director of the A-Star Singapore Institute of Food and Biotechnology Innovation. Dr. Tan, welcome to the studio.
Thank you, a pleasure.
First of all, if you could explain to us what synthetic biology is, for most of us who don't know, and how does it apply to the way everyday products are made?
Okay. So I'll take it in a very, very simple way. So I would say it's more like kind of programming, writing a program for cells, for living cells, to do the things that we want them to do. Or writing a recipes, to make these little cells produce things. So I would imagine like things like bacteria to be little factories with a factory line, and enzymes, you hear a lot of enzymes, refer to that. Then these are enzymes as little helpers to accelerate or to stitch things together to do it a specific way. So it's a very engineered way doing biology. Yeah. And I would say that, before we give some more examples, but traditionally, maybe it's not synthetic biology, but through, we are familiar with soy sauce fermentation, yogurt fermentation. These are also leveraging the source of nature to create flavor, texture, or nutrients that's good for health.
So how will this translate into real outcomes for all of us in day-to-day life? What kind of ingredients or products can really benefit from such processes?
So we were already seeing such ingredients in our daily life without even realizing it. Just to give you an example, vanillin. So when you have ice creams, you have vanilla ice cream, and the vanillin, the flavor is already produced through synthetic biology rather than through extraction of the vanilla pods. And of something that's very important, like insulin. Insulin, in fact, is one of the first synthetic biologically produced drugs, and many people has benefited from insulin, millions and millions of that. So you can see the benefit on more from not just from food, cosmetics, and also from drugs.
Dr. Tan, why do you think we're seeing a stronger global push towards more bio-based production? And also, how is Singapore then intending to position itself, especially given that we have quite a small domestic market?
So I will maybe bring to two key points, which maybe part of it you raised earlier with Professor William as well. So one is about resource scarcity. Yeah, that's also linked to supply chain disruption. How can we be independent of that? The world, the land is finite, and we have been talking for a very long time about by 2050, does the world has enough, be it space or resource, for 10 billion of people? Do we have enough of that? And I think Singapore, we feel that specifically as well when we talked about food security and supply chain disruption. So that's something that that's an area that I would imagine synthetic biology can pave the way to. Second is about climate warming, environmental change. So a lot of industry is basically, current industry today is in one way or another contributing to this. And through synthetic biology, we can actually manage that as well in the future.
So it's a very real and long-term solution as well to very important problems like, today we're just mentioning the Middle East crisis, El Nino. So this actually in the long run is an investment into protecting us against such changes. So when it comes to safety concerns, for people who are not sure about these products and how they're made, how would you reassure them that safeguards are put in place to make sure it's made in a way that's safe for consumption?
I would imagine, maybe I'll just take one step back. Sometimes people ask me, is synthetic biology, the word synthetic, that sounds a bit unnatural. But actually that came from the word of synthesis. It's basically putting things together in the way that we want it to work. So whether is it safe, I think we basically, of course, there's a lot of safety constraints that we need to look after. But just to give, if it is a normal fungus that we already consuming, be it in soy soy sauce or bacteria already in yogurt. It's already safe consumption. And how we work on that, I think this is where we, through evolution, we can always make sure that it's safe. Because, I mean, you already see example, such as I mentioned earlier, like vanillin, or even proteins like peptides for cosmetics have already been in market. So these are kind of evolution. We need to make sure we have the responsibility to evolve, innovate, but also always make sure that it's safe.
Yeah, so that's the safety part of it. Well, you also mentioned earlier the word synthetic, and that calls to mind as well some level of it being maybe artificial or not natural. So for those who are concerned about quality, does it imply that it is of lower quality, for example, or different quality from petrochemical sources?
No, in fact, they are a lot of the examples, they are equivalent, like the vanillin or even the insulin, they're equivalent to the natural source.
Well, if we were also to talk a bit more about the stronger global push as well, do you see this as being an important point when it comes to sustainability? And how does it contribute to the way we produce, manufacture products in a more sustainable way?
Definitely. I think coming back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of environment, right? So a lot of these through synthetic biology, producing them, in a more sustainable way, it can in one way or another is one of the solutions to reduce, for example, carbon footprint that we talked a lot about.
Dr. Tan, thank you so much for sharing about this with us. I've been chatting with Dr. Sue Tan, who is Executive Director of the A-Star Singapore Institute of Food and Biotechnology Innovation.